Welcome to our podcast series, where sustainability meets inspiration. Join us today as we journey through the world of sustainable living, regenerative agriculture, and urban farming. We're talking to three men who have all played unique and diverse roles in reshaping our relationship with the environment and fostering a more harmonious future. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered to make a positive impact in your own life and community. Welcome to the forefront of sustainable living.
Nev, welcome to the Off Grid Tribe podcast.
Thank you.
So, mate, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you and your history with off grid living?
Okay, probably somewhere close to 45 years ago, I read a book which was almost of no use to me, but got me interested in the whole concept of self-sufficiency / survival. I guess back in the 80s, I would have called myself survivalist. We live on 600 square meters. Being self-sufficient on 600 square meters is not only difficult, it's impossible. But it was something to strive for before we moved to the country. Now, in the end, we never moved to the country for various very important and salient reasons. And so what that means is with 600 square meters, you really have to make the most of what you've got. And it sets out a whole stack of limits that you have to work around, and that's part of the interest in what I've been doing. So we've been making our own solar electricity. I've had some solar going to the lights for probably 35 years. We've been growing some of our own food for over 40. The amount of food that we grow now is a lot more than it was when I started, because when I started, much to my father's humorous laughing at, I was growing plants that I thought were productive that turned out not to be, like sweet peas. You can't eat a sweet pea. I didn't know that at the time. But over the years, I've learned quite a bit. I did farm tech at Western Sydney TAFE. I've done permaculture courses and various other bits over the years, most of it through TAFE. And so what I learned, I could then bring back here and use, look at the design and see what we could get out of the place. A lot of the stuff that I found works, I would love to say was due to my genius in planning, but it wasn't. It was due to the fact that it happened to go into the right place and has worked really well. Other stuff hasn't. And I found that's taught me stuff. And I go, well, I'm not going to do that again. I've made the mistake, so you don't have to. And
experience is one of those things you wish you had just before you got it.
Indeed, very much so. Where you sit there and look at it and go, crap, I shouldn't have put it there. And that's happened over the years. But about 12 years ago, well, actually further than that, about 15, 20 years ago, I decided what I wanted to do was to share what I'd learned and how things were going and what we were doing. And so we started opening for Sustainable House Day, or Solar House Day as it was in those days.
Yep.
And I'd take them through what we were growing. I'd take them through the solar system, which at that stage had two parts. It was all 12 volt. And one part was for the lights and the other was for a 12-volt fridge.
Yep. So, mate,
that was basically it.
Yeah, tell us more about that, because I think with what I do in the years, with helping people design off-grid solar systems, these days a lot of people just want to go completely self-sufficient, have this big off-grid solar system. And I love the way that you did yours. And tell us more about what you did in the early days and how your system evolved. And I suppose then tell people how off-grid are you from energy point of view.
Okay, we started out, and again, I'm saying the time, I'm not sure, but about 35 years ago, I decided I wanted to have a backup system. That's the way it originally evolved, was to be a backup system. So what I did was I got myself some second-hand forklift batteries. I got two 6-volt, wired them in series and got 12-volt. Put them in the garage and ran some wiring up to a set of lights in the lounge room and in the kitchen. And they were the little round lights that have a festoon bulb with the contacts on each end. And when you turned it on, you could move around without running into things, but not a lot else. So if there was a power outage, you could see what you were doing, but there wasn't enough light to read. It basically enabled you to navigate. And that was good. So I bought from SolarX a SolarX panel. It was 1.35 amps and made with the old round cells. And I put that on the roof of the garage. And then I've got a second set of the forklift batteries, which never worked. And one of the things I learned, and up until I met you, all of my experience had been lead acid batteries.
Yeah.
And I found out sort of some things about lead acid batteries that, you can have problems with them. If one is not right, then they're all not right, and had a few problems. So in the end, a gentleman that I used to know in Canberra had been gotten hold of some deep cycle batteries out of an old Telstra exchange. They were backup batteries for there.
Yep.
And they were pretty big. I got 4 of them, again 6 volt wide to 12 volt, and put them in. Got rid of the other batteries, took them back to the recycler, and then ran some more wiring to the point where eventually I had a 12 volt light in each room.
Yep.
But the festoon bulbs, and then I was at a show. I just can't remember what sort of show. I think it wasn't an off-grid show, obviously, in those days, and we were talking a long time ago now. But they showed me a German 12-volt fluoro light, and I sort of, when they turned it on, I thought, this is amazing, and they were not cheap. They were over $100 each, and I bought a few and scattered them around the house, and the system went from being a backup to being the main system, at least for lighting. We had a few other bits and pieces. I've got a little 12 volt pump, which I use on one of the tanks, and a few things over the years turned up. And then these batteries that my mate had, I don't know how long they had been in the place that he got them. He had them for 5 years under his house. He gave them to me, and I operated them for 15 years. At the end of that 15 years, I wouldn't carry a charge in a bucket. So I had to get some proper deep cycle batteries, and had some fun with that and learned some hard lessons about what the term deep cycle means. Because I thought deep cycle, take it down to 6 volt for a 12 volt battery. Yeah, not a problem. That's not right. Deep cycle goes from 12.8 volts down to 12.2 or 12.1.
Yeah.
And it does, and I ran them into the ground basically.
Yep.
So batteries that should have lasted 15 years lasted less than 5. I also did boil them dry on one occasion for some reason. So again, lots of mistakes. I made sure that I did some reading. I got a hold of some good books, so that I understood things a bit better, and set up another system. And then basically over the years, got a number of solar cells, wired them all in, bearing in mind that all of this has been 12 volt.
Yep.
So I had a couple of plug-in inverters, so I could use bits and pieces in the garage if I wanted to, if we were power free. I had no trouble with that. And they were, one of them was this big square wave inverter that I got off my brother, and it hardly had any power at all. The thing was huge and consumed a large amount of electricity, but it was an interesting piece of equipment.
Yep. Yeah. I think a lot of people these days forget the fact that you can actually just go off grid and do your lights, TVs, and fridges. It doesn't have to be a whole house. I think a lot of people think, it's just so unaffordable, but it's more about what's your intention and what do they want. And like, yeah, if you just want lights, TVs, and fridges and a blackout, I suppose what you've got or had, it's a very low cost way of doing things. And the technology these days is far more advanced than, when you started your first system.
Indeed. Indeed. And the solar panels are a lot cheaper and a lot better.
Yeah.
For sure. But then, I thought about doing more, and we talked about it and realised that it made sense to put a system in using the nickel-ion batteries. I like the idea of a battery that doesn't clag out after 5 years, and also looking at what the power we were consuming, and basically now, of course, with the panels and the batteries I've got, I can run the house. With the exception of three things. One is we've got solar hot water that has an electric boost. That's a bit high. We have a small aircon, and there is a power point in the garage, which is not connected through the system because I use it with my welder.
Yep.
And clearly that would do horrible things to the system. So it's still working well. Things have changed a bit from what they were. In that, again, this is the interesting part where I had a banana circle in the front yard, which was in the right place.
I remember that.
Yeah, and mate, the bananas were as tall as me and were like that for 10 years. No bananas, just they sat there going, meh, can't do much. So I turned that round and we took it to the backyard, changed everything, made sure we got grey water from the bath.
Yep.
The shower goes to them. And lots of organic matter, and they shot up to about 4 or 5 meters.
Yeah, right.
Now that I did not see that coming. The downside of that is that they now shade some of the panels, particularly in winter. So my original idea and what we discussed was the measurements I'd done and taken is we would, on the shortest day, I wanted to produce 5 kilowatt hours because 5 kilowatt hours is what we were using. And that's what we set the system up on. Now, unfortunately, with the shading I'm getting, that's dropped to about 4 kilowatt hours on the shortest day. Obviously, that varies throughout the year. And in the middle of summer, it means it's neither here nor there. But we've also added a few electrical bits and pieces. The original 12-volt fridge is gone. We put in a 240-volt fridge, a small 240-volt fridge. And then just recently, within the last 6 months or so, we've got a larger fridge which has a freezer in it. And that's increased our base load. We have a gas oven, but I've got a small electric oven which is much more efficient. And we've got an induction hot plate, which is my second best friend. It works really well.
I love induction cookers. They're great.
For specific things, it works great.
Yep.
And I use that in summer. We've got the wood burner for winter, which we cook on and in. It's got an oven and it's got a hot plate on that. So we use that during winter. When we've got plenty of sun, we use the induction and a few other bits and pieces. I mean, I've got a solar oven, but in the last 3 years, it hasn't seen a lot of use. We've had a lot of rain.
Yeah.
So there's bits and pieces with the cooking where we can make use of things efficiently. But in general terms, our baseline of electricity consumption has gone up.
Yep.
So,
and that's I'm on my third off-grid house that I've basically done in a matter of years, and it's one thing that I always say to people now from my experience of designing off-grid solar systems, and just fill the roof, just maximize it, because it's the most expensive thing to do, to come back in the future and add and do that sort of stuff. And when people tend to go solar and get solar, they tend to use more energy because you've got all this excess energy. So, and
that's true. And so in summer, you buy bits and pieces that you can make use of the excess energy, because our excess energy does not go to the grid. We have a very small 1 kilowatt back to the grid system, which with the feed-in tariff we've got gives us about sort of 60 cents a month, which is just so great. But you put things in, and then of course in winter you go, oh, yeah, well, not that bad. We have things sorted out, but the fact of the matter is, with things like the fridge, it's caused a greater base load, which there's a few problems associated with it. So when I did the math and added up all of what we could produce in terms of the panels, it adds up to about 2.4 kilowatts. But practically, we get about 1.6.
Yeah.
Part of that is because that's the limit on the
charge controller.
Charge controller.
Yep.
But really, we don't get much more than that. And I think people looking through things could get very disappointed when they put in a system that they think is going to give them a larger amount than they're actually going to get.
Yep.
So because the way that they work out what a panel produces and what you actually get out of it, it's like some of the ads you see on TV. And it's like a Macca's thing. What you see on TV and what you actually get are two different things.
They're not as big.
No, not as big.
So what advice, if someone was looking to go off grid now, and the other thing as well, so before I ask that question, so what do you define off grid? Because I know it's a lot of people call me every single day saying, hey, Mike, I want to go off grid, but what would you consider, what does off grid mean to you?
Well, I guess for me, there's two. There's off grid, which is in small lowercase, all lowercase, off grid. And that's where you look at your electricity and see if you can get to the point where you don't need the grid anymore. And I've got a little bit more to say about that in a sec. But there's off grid, which is capital O, capital G. And that's where you're basically self-sufficient. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things when we talked about it, we agreed, and it made a huge amount of sense to me, is when you have a solar setup, you've got to have a backup of some description.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get bad weather, and you don't want to be sort of sitting there with a candle trying to cook your tea over it. So for us, the backup was the grid. Rather than get a 10 kVA generator or something, which have the neighbours trying to hog tie me and drag me off into the street because of the noise it was making. It didn't make sense, but the grid was already there. So in terms of off grid, for parts of the year, we are absolutely off grid into that small o, small g. But in terms of all of the year, no, we're not. If you get a few days of really bad weather, then we're using the grid more than I would like. And certainly in the colder, the parts of the year, about a month either side of the shortest day is where we're using the grid as our backup as well.
That's it. Yeah, well, one thing for me, and it was, when I left Sydney and moved to the Northern Rivers, a guy called Tony, he was the general manager at Nova Energy at the time, and Nova Energy is a community-based energy company. They've gone bust due to certain things. I can see straight away when I met the guys, I could see why they're probably going to go broke. But Tony gave me a really good bit of advice, and my setup was very similar to yours in Sydney. And one thing that I see, a lot of people want to go off grid and do everything by themselves. And when the grid's available, what Tony sort of said to me and said, Mike, the one thing that you're not doing when you're off grid and you're self-sufficient in the middle of town, you're not feeding excess energy back to the grid. You're not helping support the community in the bigger picture. And that really changed my outlook of what off-grid means to me, because I'd always been like, nah, no grid, I'm self-sufficient and do things by myself. And he really opened my eyes up, and now, like, my house in Lismore, we got a 25 kilowatt solar system. It's ridiculous. And I power like maybe 5 houses in our street, so, and I really changed my approach of like, if I'm going to put solar on a house, I'm going to maximize it, and I will feed the whole neighborhood solar, whether they like it or not.
And that is such a good point, because it wasn't something that I considered either until a few years ago now. We had a guy come out to talk to Permaculture Sydney West. I'm a member of Permaculture Sydney West, and I arranged people to come out and talk to us. And this guy was talking to us about power and that sort of stuff. It wasn't you did that as well, but this was another guy. And one of the points he raised was the fact that if you are totally off grid and you have the cash to support that, it's shorting the people who don't, because it's reducing the effort put into the national system to the local system. And so it's going to have a bad effect on other people who are less able to afford it than you are. And that did make me think about that.
Yep. No, totally. And mate, so with permaculture, now you've just recently been given the honor of being a permaculture elder. Tell us more about that.
I'm officially old. Is what it says. No, this surprised the living daylights out of me. I got an email from one of the board, a person by the name of Toad, who said, "Listen, we want to make you a permaculture elder." And I went, "Oh, that's very nice, thank you." He said, "Are you coming to the convergence?" And I said, "No," which turned out to be a very fortunate thing, because it was not that long after that I got COVID. So it wouldn't have been a fun thing. But he said, "Okay, that's fine. You don't need to come down. We'll post it out to you." And I thought that was really nice. And then a friend of mine, Danielle Wheeler, was actually down there and saw when they were doing the awards, and gave me some of the names of the people who are also getting awards. And it was people like David Holmgren and Robin Williamson and a whole stack of people. You look at it and go, really, their people are out there doing things. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not out there doing all that much. Why did they give it to me? It was really nice. And it's a nice thing to have and to know. I didn't even know that the board knew my name, let alone some of the stuff I've done. So they wanted to give me the award. So yeah, it was a shock, a nice shock, and I was very, very pleased to receive it. It would have been nice if it was sort of a permaculture young person thing. But I guess, with the beard and stuff, I guess permaculture elder, I'll just have to wear that.
But tell us more about your permaculture journey. So where did that all start for you?
Okay. Up until the year 2000, I was looking at self-sufficiency and on a 600 metre block. And I was looking at growing our stuff, and I was basically looking at the survivalist side of it, which tends to emphasise doing it yourself. And I think personally that's its downfall. And then what happened was I was working in occupational health and safety, and I got a job which was the National Occupational Health Safety and Environment Manager, which threw a bit of a scare into me because I didn't know a lot about it. So I went back to uni and did my master's in OHS and environmental management, with the emphasis being on environmental. And some of the stuff that we went through there scared the living daylights out of me, because it really wasn't until that point, and then doing the study associated with that, that I understood that there were environmental problems, and that started to open my mind a bit. And then it probably wasn't too many years after that, I was wandering around an environmental show at Darling Harbour, and a gentleman that I knew was on a stand there, and I was standing and having a chat to him, and he was a member of Permaculture Sydney West. And he said, "Listen, you'd get along with these guys. You should come along." And that would have been about 15 years ago. And so I started going. We were meeting in a teacher's staff room at a public school in Westmead. And so it was a small group at that stage. There would have been 25, 30 people, and, got people in to have a talk. And then that, we started to get some more members. It got bigger, went into their hall, and then we started hiring our own hall. And I did various things on the committee. I was president for a while and treasurer for a while, and went through a whole stack of that, along with some very good friends of mine, Greg and Vera Meyer, who are just powerhouses in this area. And we were able to do some good things, and we've got, I don't know, something like 125, 130 people on the books now, and where we would get, we can get it 60, 70. When we had Costa turn up pre-COVID, we had 90 people for a meeting. So we're getting more people coming in there, and we're running courses and doing blitzes and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
it's developed over the years.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Greg, one thing I remember from Greg when I went to a permaculture, one of the nights there is I remember Greg doing a talk, and he said, you're going to always pay when it comes to food or your health. You're either going to pay buying organic food from the supermarket, or you're going to pay at the chemist later on in life.
Yep, pretty much.
And that's so stuck with me. It was so true. It was like, you always pay, it's always going to end up costing you the same. You either choose to buy better food or grow better food, or you can just pay for it at the chemist later on.
Which way are you going to go? That's what it's all about. I also should mention that about 2010, a friend I've already mentioned, Danielle Wheeler, she runs permaculture courses, and she approached me and said, listen, I would like you to come and be a co-teacher at my permaculture course. And I said, no, basically, because I've never done one. But what I will do is I'll turn up and I'll do your permaculture course. And that was, they let me get away with stuff because of the things that I've done in PSW. But I didn't have a qualification. So at that time, I decided, yes, I'm going to get a qualification. And I did. And then I went back and co-taught one course with her, which was just a huge amount of fun. But yeah, so it has been a journey, and you learn stuff. And I like to think that you also teach stuff. I think I've been able to teach a few people some bits and pieces. Hopefully they've used it. You never know. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. It hasn't stopped. I'm still a member, and various stuff for various councils. Worked with half a dozen councils under the auspices of PSW. Made some cash for me, some cash for them. People seem to enjoy it. So that's been a lot of fun. But I haven't done a lot of that since COVID turned up. I've sort of backed off from that.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. This week I'm actually talking with Edmund Williams, all the way from the States, from Arizona. And Edmund's here to tell us all about LEHR Gardens. So Edmund, tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm I guess the easiest way to describe how I got where I am is by profession, I'm a civil engineer, but my hobby is engineering with ecosystems. And it's one of those things where as my profession started moving towards sustainability, I started seeing some of the things, and you can see a little bit. I've got a terrarium right here where I play with building ecosystems that self-function. And as we started looking into sustainability and trying to really understand where we needed to go to create something that's sustainable, I realized that some of the engineering that I do with ecosystems actually works in the built environment too. And I started kind of playing around there. So is that helpful?
Awesome. So, mate, tell us a bit more about the LEHR Garden. I know when I first started some research and stuff like that, we were sort of getting compared to a bit more of an aquaponics sort of type garden. Can you tell us a bit more about that there?
That's kind of where I started. I mean, when I first moved down to Phoenix is a really brutal growing environment. It gets up to 100 degrees, or about 115, 120 degrees pretty regularly in the summertime, which I think is 45 Celsius, somewhere around there.
Sounds hot, mate.
It's hot. It's really hot. And so it's one of those things where in some cases you got to water a couple times a day. And, I had just found out about aquaponics and was really kind of itching to do some experiments, but I'm a soil guy. I mean, ecosystem guy. You cannot throw out the soil. And so I wanted to see if I could make something that was going to be as automated as possible, something that was going to work in the heat. But of course we can grow all the way through the winter because we have super mild winters here. But then also something that was going to play with some of the functions of aquaponics, but without what was still using the soil. And it, just in the first year, it did some things that I really wasn't expecting. And, first of all, I have a bit of a moral problem with buying soil because everything turns into soil as it decomposes. So, I was really looking to buy, okay, I got a tray. I'm going to try my system out. I came up with a design and, what can I throw in there without having to actually buy soil? And I had a bunch of spent mushroom blocks. And they hadn't produced, and one of them was about 9 months and the other one was about 6 months that they hadn't produced anything. And I'd already gotten several flushes, and I put them in this tray that's only 6 inches deep in full sun in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was June when I first planted it, which is really our hottest month. And we all know that, mushrooms, I don't know if you've ever tried growing mushrooms, they don't like, most of the ones we have in cultivation don't like extreme heat. So figured if there's anything left, it was going to roast them. And I set up this system, and it kind of was set up like an aquaponic system. And it did pretty well through the summer. And then October hit, the temperatures dropped, and all of a sudden mushrooms started popping up. And I'm like, okay, something interesting is happening here. And then the following summer, June hit, and my boss sent me on a 2-week training seminar out of state. And the most I could find, I didn't have anybody who could take care of the garden for me. So, I had somebody just stick their head out 3 times a week and just look at it. Is anything flooding? Is anything drying? Is anything dead? And if any of those things happen, give me a call. And for 2 weeks, I didn't get a call. I get home, everything was great. It ran itself through the hottest part of the year. With all I lost was 2 clover plants that died because of the heat, not because of the lack of functioning in the garden. So I started really kind of looking at it from the standpoint of like, what is going on here? And that was about 10 years ago. When I first built my first one, and I've gone through a lot of iterations on design, functionality, stuff like that. And basically, where we're at now is something. The reason I call it a LEHR garden and not just aquaponics is because it isn't aquaponics anymore. We don't actually need fish. The fish are not an integral part of. We put fish in it typically to help manage the mosquitoes. But generally speaking, most of my customers don't want to mess with fish. I've only ever had a couple who were like, "Hey, I'm going to put some tilapia in here, and we'll grow fish as part of it." But it actually does really well without fish. It's the living soil is really where the magic is at.
My wife would really enjoy that because our aquaponics, we run goldfish, and she's like, "Fish are friends. We're not eating our friends."
Yeah, and I tend to put goldfish in too. They're if you keep them shaded, they'll survive the heat of the summer, and they definitely survive the cold of the winter. So they're pretty tough.
Yeah, it's one thing we really noticed, like where we are in the Northern Rivers, is my whole concept of aquaponics was like we could go away for weeks, and one of the biggest struggles in our life right now is going away and someone look after the dogs and the animals and all that sort of stuff. And aquaponics is one of those things. You put a fish feeder in and just look after itself. And we actually lose a lot of water just from evaporation basically, from aquaponics. So I was actually amazed after the years I've done it of how much water you lose from evaporation, which is pretty crazy. So so mate,
so tell us, put a float valve in it?
No,
so it'll keep itself topped off?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it's in a temporary spot at the moment, and that was temporary 5 years ago.
I know how that goes.
So it was temporary 5 years ago, so it's still there. So it's funny, we had some concrete work done, and actually we concreted around the aquaponics. So that little garden bed. So should have really moved it and got the concrete done and put it back, but I think my thinking was if I get it on the concrete and that's where it's going to live, it's going to have all that thermal mass from the concrete heating it up and cause a whole other heap of headaches in summer, for the poor fish. So, Okay, so mate, tell us, what does LEHR stand for the guys listening at home?
It's linking ecosystem and hardware for regeneration.
Cool.
So basically what we're saying is that if you look at there's a lot of people who have recognized that industrial agriculture isn't doing us any favors. And a lot of people have really tried to analyze the problem and understand what are the problems, what are the solutions. And a lot of people have come up with a lot of different solutions to it. And I want to be clear, I don't really think any of them are wrong. We don't need a silver bullet to fix everything. But if you look at those solutions that they've come up with, almost every single one of them has either said technology is the problem, we're going to go towards the ecosystem, which is where you get agroforestry, permaculture, holistic management, a lot of different things like that. But to get the technology out as much as you can, use Mother Nature. And then you've got the other side that says Mother Nature is a problem. All diseases come out of the soil. So we're going to get this nature out of it as much as possible. And we're going to push it towards technology, which is where you get vertical farming, hydroponics, aeroponics. To some extent, I think aquaponics is a little bit less extreme on that. But in most cases, they're trying to go either one way or the direction or the other. With the LEHR garden, we're using both. We're saying we're going to use the ecology to a very high level. We're going to use the hardware to a very high level. We're eventually moving towards Internet of Things for gardening. We're not quite there yet, but we're using timers and tanks and beds and constructed filters and all kinds of things. But then on top of that, we're creating this really incredible, vibrant soil that builds itself in place while the gardens are running. And, so you have this incredible community of soil organisms that are really creating the ecology that we need. We have got it's a full, complete ecosystem. And so what we're doing is, instead of using the technology to replace the ecosystem function, we're using the technology to enhance and accelerate that ecosystem functioning. And then, so that would be the linking, and, we got the ecosystem and the hardware, they're working together, they're linked together. And then for the regeneration. So it is designed to be a form of regenerative agriculture that's going to work. I need to work anywhere, but really it's designed to solve some of the problems of urban agriculture.
Yeah. So urbans for me is one of those things that I think over the years that I always think, especially with what I do, helping people go off grid.
Mm-hmm.
I think just by default, people that have that mindset and attitude that go off grid and go be self-sufficient in the middle of nowhere, they're not actually, they're fine, because they're going to go live off grid, be self-sufficient. Yeah. And they're already on that mission to make a difference. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things for me, that's why I like, taking houses off grid in the middle of cities and in urban environments, because I think that's where the biggest impact can make. Because I know there's a lot of people that listen to the podcast or follow us on YouTube and that live in the city and have this dream of going off grid in the middle of nowhere, thinking that's going to be the solution. But I think there's so much we can do in urban environments, and especially with products like yours, of how we can, accelerate growing and grow a lot more from a lot less, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons to really push on that, kind of expounding on what you're saying. First of all, I was on a resilience fellowship a couple years back through the Arizona State University. And one of the things that they said that, went through the research, and they found that if you want to be truly resilient, having a community around you is the best way to do that, because, you've got all your food, you've got your weapons, you've got your land, you've got your off-grid equipment, and then you break your leg. And what are you going to do? It's having that community of people where you have a diversity of skills and people who are willing to work together and build that community is where the best form of resilience is going to be. And, let's see if we can find a way to turn an urban area from, if something, God forbid, happens, from a nightmare hellscape into something where everybody can just lean on each other and pull through. That's I think where it's at.
Yep. Yeah, totally. From my sales training days, when I used to train sales guys, we used to have an acronym for team, and it stood for together, everyone achieves more. And, I think even with what I've done over the years with helping people off grid, I see a lot of people go off grid and go alone and realize how much hard work it is. And, I've seen plenty of divorces over the years and people selling up and stuff because it's all way too hard.
Yeah.
And that I think people realize of how much support we do get from the community, and as a community, how much we support each other. So,
And I think also in an urban area, what you have is an opportunity of if you can create a life for people that's going to make them more resilient to whatever changes are coming down the road, and then be like improve their life now, but make them more resilient. When stuff happens, you got those people aren't going to be part of the problem. They're going to be part of the solution. And, it's just going to be better for everybody. We got a lot more people here in the urban area, and we've got to find a way to bring in more people and make it a better world,
Hey guys, welcome. And today we're talking with Greg Patterson from the Urban Farm in America. So Greg, tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh my gosh. Well, it starts right after I was born. I was very interested in my 9, 10, 11 years on the planet. I was interested in figuring out how to grow my own food. And I started with fish aquariums, and I was growing fish in aquariums to eat at the age of 9 and 10 years old. I have no idea where that came from. And that kind of transitioned into a whole gardening thing itself. We moved into our Weldon, we called it the Weldon house, when I was 14 years old. And Mom said, Greg, see the right half of our backyard? That's your garden. Go start digging. So I actually planted my first garden at the age of 14. I planted my first fruit trees at the age of 15. And I'm 61 now, so I've been growing food for almost 50 years. And that really is driven by my need to share with people that the most important thing that we can be doing right now is figuring out where our food comes from, number one, and how to grow our own.
Yeah.
And so my journey for the past 50 years has been all about figuring that out.
Yeah. So what's the reason you think that growing our own food is the most important thing we can do right now?
We have, in the world, we have a very broken food system. It's a food system that delivers food just in time, which from one perspective, it's a miracle. In the States here, we have 330 million people, and essentially 330 million people get fed 3 times a day. And it's this system that delivers food to the grocery stores when it's fresh so that we have it. And it's very prone to breakdown. When COVID hit, the grocery store shelves emptied. We had a truckers' strike a few years ago. The grocery store shelves were empty. And storms, hurricanes, cyclones, when they come through, the grocery store shelves get empty. And that in itself is a problem. So that's one of the problems with our food system. The other problem with our food system is the manufacturing part.
Yeah.
The food that is manufactured. So they take food that grows, whether it be an animal or a plant, and they manufacture it into something else. And they add chemicals, and chemicals are used to grow them in a lot of cases. And so what we're feeding ourselves is food that is not really that good for us. And in some cases, it's actually causing diabetes and heart attacks. And, it's not a healthy food system.
Yeah.
All the way around.
Yeah, I was actually talking with a guy yesterday, a permaculture designer, regarding mulberries. We on the weekend, I took my kids to a permaculture introduction course for kids, and it was amazing, and they learned so much out of it. And
oh my gosh, how cool is that?
Yeah, it was good. We did Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We didn't stick around Monday because we'd been actually on a holiday before that. The kids were pretty burnt out, and but one of the things that we were discussing was, I grew up in a country town, and mulberries was always our thing of trees. And there's a mulberry tree between here and my kids' school where we ride the bikes. It's always like mulberries on the way home, not the way to school. So we were talking about that mulberries. I'm thinking about how many people around the world have actually never eaten a mulberry, because a lot of people just don't randomly pick fruit off trees. I'm one of those people. I do.
You and me too. I do that too.
But because it's one of those fruits, like it's never been grown or designed to be transported. So unless you know someone with a mulberry tree or wherever, you're probably someone that's never really experienced eating a mulberry.
Right.
Yeah, because most of the fruits, they are grown and picked and to be transported. So
yeah. Well, and that is another problem with our food system. They have to harvest the food before it's completely ripe. So it's not as nutrient dense as it should be. And then the moment they harvest the food, it starts losing that nutrient density that it does have. So by the time it arrives to us, it's ripened off the vine. It's high in something called lectins, and it's not nutrient dense enough for us. So harvesting food, I'll tell you what, if you grow a peach tree, you harvest the peach when it's at its peak of ripeness and you eat that, you will never eat a store-bought peach again. It won't happen. Just because it tastes so good. It'll make your toes tingle.
No, totally. So tell us more about, I think when I did my house in Sydney, we had 600 square meters and we took it off grid and we had 40 fruit trees, lots of stuff. And the biggest challenge we had with Sydney with being self-sufficient was for water, because we only got 700 mil a year. And it was sort of that compromise I took. It was like, well, either put a 50,000 litre water tank in to have water be self-sufficient for the whole year, or just buy from town water. But the challenge, for yourself, and I looked at what you've done over the years, like not only did you have, your urban block of land, you did it in the middle of the desert. So tell us more about that, about growing fruit trees and in the desert.
Yeah, so I actually have really refined growing fruit trees in hot climates over the past 40 plus years of growing fruit trees. And it came from killing a lot of fruit trees, not on purpose, but just, that's in permaculture, which I like to call the art and science of working with nature. Observation is the number one thing in my world. You observe, you pay attention to what's going on. So I got serious about growing fruit trees in the desert in 1989. Prior to that, I grew some, but it was more like a hobby. In 1989, it became a severe hobby to a business. And we had to get very clear about what it takes to have a water-hungry tree, like a fruit tree, survive in the desert. So I spent a lot of time and energy kind of walking my way through what does that look like, and what it looks like in the desert. And I've actually, so I don't know if your listeners know this yet, but we went 3,100 kilometers. We moved a year and a half ago and moved from a place, the desert, to a place that gets a lot more rain. We get about 4 inches of rain a month, as opposed to about a ½ inch of rain a month in Phoenix. So that's I don't know the centimeters on that, but
so we would say 200 mil. And did you say an inch a month?
About ½ inch a month in the desert.
So it's about 25 mil. So so it's a lot less.
So, and the reason I shared that with you is in the background, in my background here, you can see, other background. There we go. In my background, you can see the swales that I put in. This is my backyard in Asheville, North Carolina, where we get 4 inches of rain a month. And those swales are catching water. So a swale, for those of you that don't know it, is an on-contour ditch. It's a ditch that runs across the landscape at the same elevation. So when it rains and the water runs downhill, it catches that water in the ditch. So I've done that. I've done that here, and I did that a lot in Phoenix. So I'm using the same techniques in the desert as I am here in a place that gets a lot more water. And that was one of the things in Phoenix that we did, was directing the water. directing it off of the roof, directing it through your landscape, putting in swales so that when it does rain, the water gets directed where you want it to. So that's the number one important thing, especially in the desert, is you've got water coming in, and I've taught water harvesting for decades. And people would always ask me, why bother harvesting water in the desert? You don't get that much. And it's like, yes, exactly. We don't get that much. We have to harvest it.
So what would some tricks, like Australia, we consider the desert here, we're a very dry country, and we're about to go into a very hot, dry summer.
Yeah.
So what's some tricks that you've learned over the years to, when there's not a lot of water around, to keep the fruit trees alive and to help them out and help them flourish?
So number one is how we actually plant the tree. So we dig a hole about 2 foot by 2 foot by about a foot deep. Sorry, my brain can't work that quick going to metric system.
They'll have Google, mate. They can work it out.
All right, perfect. And what we do is we take 40% of the native dirt in the hole and we put it in the wheelbarrow. And then we add 60% planting mix and compost. So healthy soil is combined of 5 components. Without all 5 components, you're not going to have healthy soil. And in the desert, and in fact, in my backyard where I planted these trees, it's mostly clay. And if you plant a tree in mostly clay and walk away, good luck.
Yeah.
So what we do is we add the other 4 components to that clay in the wheelbarrow. And how we do that is we take the 60% planting mix, the 40% native soil, clay, mix it up in the wheelbarrow. We add worm castings. Worm castings are gardener's gold. If you're into gardening, go get some worm castings. You know how important they are. They have soil life and nutrients in it. We add 2 pounds of worm castings. We add 2 pounds of azomite. Azomite is a rock dust mineral. It's like a vitamin pill for your tree. We had 2 pounds of organic fertilizer. And then we add 2 ounces of mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is soil life. And we mix all of that up in the wheelbarrow. So what we've done is we've taken the dirt and we've added the other 4 components for healthy soil. And those other 4 components are airspace. So by digging the hole and fluffing it, we added airspace. Water. So with that airspace, the water can get in. Organic matter. And soil life. So that's the 5 components of healthy soil: dirt, airspace, water, organic matter, and everything that's alive in the soil. And we fluff it all up and then we plant it. And what we're doing there is we're giving that tree a limb up, an opportunity to get established in the space. And we always have people plant in the winter. So the tree gets established in the space before it gets really hot.
Yeah.
So that's the number one thing that we do, is plant the tree right. We've given it vitamin pills, we've given it fertilizer, we've given it soil life in that hole. The second thing that we do is what I call my 6-6 rule, which is a 6-foot diameter by 6-inch deep woody mulch basin. That's I think that's around 2 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, around a 2 meter circular basin around the tree that's 6 inches deep, about that far.
Yeah.
And then what we do is we fill that with woody mulch. And this I discovered in the desert, and it works really well where we're at. Here is where we get 4 inches of rain a month. And that woody mulch at the interface between the dirt and the woody mulch, it starts breaking down really fast to make really healthy soil. So essentially what we've done is we've dug our hole, we've supplemented the soil going into the hole, we covered the ground around the hole with woody mulch that's breaking down into healthy soil, just like it does in the forest. So that's step 1 and step 2. Step 3 is that we plant some kind of ground cover around the base of the tree, especially in the desert. It gets to 60 degrees C at ground level. It gets to 70 degrees C at the dirt level sometimes. That's not air temperature, but it gets that hot. That's enough to kill your trees. So by planting, we use cowpeas or sweet potatoes around the basins of the trees. That shades the ground, and that'll drop the temperature significantly, 30, 40 degrees in the summertime. So those are the big three things that we do. And you notice I haven't talked about water yet.
Yeah.
This is all stuff, except as one component of healthy soil. This is all stuff that we're doing before we're watering. And that woody mulch, the 6 inches of woody mulch, that holds the moisture in. And then the ground cover across helps hold the moisture in. I used to get this question a lot, and there were a lot of permaculturists in the low desert in Phoenix and Tucson that would give me a hard time about planting fruit trees in the desert. And my contention has always been that, hey, we either have to ship this stuff in from someplace far away and there's an environmental impact of that, or we can grow it in our backyard and spend the water that we would, maybe spend on our landscape and put it on our trees. And I've taught gray water harvesting. That's taking water that goes down most of the drains of your house, just not your toilet or your kitchen sink, and using it in your landscape. That's completely legal in Arizona because of a guy named Brad Lancaster and the work that he's done over the past 25 years. So using gray water, and then just start exploring where you have water coming at around your house. One of the things that I discovered maybe 25 years ago is the condensation coming off of air conditioning. In a hot climate puts off gallons of water every day. Liters. I'll say that puts off liters of water every day. So harvest that water and use it. So you just get real creative.
Yeah, we had at our old office, the guy upstairs had aircon and his drip pipes went down into the warehouse, and I just threw a indoor plant under it. It was great.
Right?
So
exactly.
solve the drip on the floor, and we had a nice plant to look at. So
there you go. So that's really that's the basis for us managing fruit trees in the desert. And I have taken a lot of those systems and I've moved it here to my new home. I planted the trees the same way. I put the woody mulch basins around them the same way. So it all works, because really what we're trying to do is build really healthy soil for the trees.
Yeah.
Just like it does in a forest.
That's it. So so with the grey water, in Australia, like states, every council has different rules and regulations and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just literally, like, out of your washing machine in the States, grab your grey water and put it straight under your fruit trees?
You absolutely can.
Yeah.
And that being said, you have to be careful what you're putting down the drain.
Yeah.
You have to be really conscious about the soap that you're using if you're using it for grey water.
Yeah. No, definitely. So would you recommend any sort of filtration system or
on the grey water?
Yeah.
Oh, no. No. Filtration systems are problematic at best and tragic at worst, because what happens in a filtration system in a tank for gray water is it becomes black water very quickly. And it's very hard on the system. The system breaks down. Then you have to figure it out. Use healthy soil. If you're building healthy soil around your trees, use that healthy soil to filter the water for you.
Yep. No, definitely. It's definitely this is actually quite a funny thing that we're looking at a job for a customer on a consultation of buying a business, and the business broker was like, "This guy's mad. He's talking about soil health and all this stuff done soil is like, it's not valuable.
Soil's not valuable.
Well, the business broker was like, this guy's mad. He's a nutter talking about soil health. He has no idea. Like, and the seller was like, and he has. I went down. It's just really sandy. Like, it's right on the beach, and the soil's amazing. It's black, dark, rich soil, and
Wow.
I can see the value in that, and so can the seller. But the business broker's like, what's he talking about? Like, who cares about the quality of the soil? The business broker has no idea.
Yeah.
They're cared about, selling the business and the assets and the turnover and all that fun stuff. And this it's an old farm basically. And the guy still to this day has looked after the soil and cared and fed the soil. It's a thing that he's done. So yeah, it's an interesting concept.
Good.
So
Buy that farm.
We're working on it, mate. We're working on it.
All right.
So there's a few things holding us up here. January, February, we can move more forward to doing a deal on it. So I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah,
exciting.
Yeah, so it is. So yeah, it'll be a good project for my customers. So it's good to get into. So mate, tell us more about how So how often would you irrigate those plants in the desert, the fruit trees?
All right. Well, you said plants, and then you said fruit trees. So let's talk fruit trees, because my gardens get watered every day in the summertime.
Yep.
And fruit trees, what I discovered, remember I said I grew up in the same area for 54 years. My garden at the Weldon house, right half of the backyard, that's where you're going to find your garden at. Go start digging, Greg. And I planted my first fruit trees then in 1975. And we had this kind of crazy thing that happens in the desert. In Phoenix, it's called flood irrigation. And we would get 6 inches, that would be about 150 millimeters of water once a month in the winter, twice a month in the summer, that would just flood into our yard. And it's a water right that came with the land, because in the early 1900s, the farmers put their land up as collateral to build a dam. Yep. And that water right has carried through. So I took that observation and watched how the fruit trees did. And the fruit trees thrived once a month in the winter, twice a month in the summer. And so that, whether you have flood irrigation in the valley or not, in the Phoenix area or not, the way that we coach people to water their trees is once a month in the winter, twice a month in the summer. So that's every 2 weeks or so, we're watering their fruit trees, and the trees thrive that way. Now, there's a couple of caveats. If we're going to have a really, really hot day, it's always a good idea to give them a little drink.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that only happens 2 or 3 times a season. The rest of the time, once a month in the winter, twice a month in the summer. And I get this question a lot. How much do I water? I can't tell you, because I don't know what your soil is.
Yeah.
You have to use a soil probe or a soil moisture meter, or watch your tree. But basically, the concept is, remember that 2 meter basin I talked about putting around the base of the tree?
Yep.
You want to fill that with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 inches of water, with about 150 millimeters of water, and let it soak in. Yep. That is a good deep water.
Yeah. Interesting. So the flood waters, so your property, they just open up the dam and the water just floods over through your property.
Yep. And so when I actually went to buy my house as an adult in 1989, that was the first thing on my list. I wanted flood irrigation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So literally your whole property just gets covered in water.
Yep. It's like a lake for a couple hours.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Here you go.
And so what I did starting about 25 or so years ago is I started teaching people how not to just grow grass in your yard, but how to grow an old growth food forest.
Yeah.
And that's from my permaculture training. And the house that I lived in was about, oh my gosh, I don't have the metric conversion, but about 13,000 square feet. That's a small lot for a city.
Yeah.
And I created, over the 32 years that I lived there, food to eat on the property every day. And I did that through fruit trees, and we had fruit on the property about 9 months a year. The time we didn't have fruit was during the hottest part of this year, which was August, September, October. But the other 9 months of the year, I had fruit that I could just go out and harvest.
Yeah.
I used open pollinated seeds on everything. So lettuce and parsley and basil and oregano and all my vegetables, I would just let them go to seed themselves and reseed themselves the next year. So there was always 15 or 20 different herbs or vegetables just growing on the property, just like it would in a forest.
Yeah. Tell us more about what a food forest means to you, and tell us more about your food forest. That would have been a bit of a challenge to walk away from and move away from.
It was a huge challenge to walk away from. And I'm working on that process. In the picture in the background here of me, I'm working on doing that again here. Basically, and when you look in permaculture, there's like 7 layers of a food forest, starting with the tallest trees down to the underneath the ground. And really what a food forest is just, it's a place, and Bill Mollison talked about this in nauseam in his permaculture courses and content. It's just a place that grows wild food. And the food doesn't have to be wild in the sense that it was just there when you arrived, but you planted things there. So, carrots and basil and all kinds of things just reseed themselves year after year after year. And the reason we call it the urban farm where I moved from in Phoenix, an old growth food forest, is because it had, over the course of almost 30 years of growing in the yard, it had become a place that just naturally grows food.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, there was, at any given moment, there are 20 or 30 things to go out in the yard and harvest, whether it be sweet potatoes, which come back every year, or cow peas, or, you name it.
Yeah, definitely. So how old was that food forest you had there?
I lived there. I lived on the property for 32 years. So approaching 30 years old.
Yep.
And that was about the same time that I discovered permaculture. So for me, discovering permaculture in 1991, permaculture talks about regenerative, putting systems in place like nature. And I like to call permaculture the art and science of working with nature, working in the flow of nature. And so in 1991, I discovered permaculture. And for me, it was like, oh my God, that's the way I think. Thank you so much. And I just follow the concepts around permaculture and nature design to build out my food forest, whether I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, or Asheville, North Carolina.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found the content educational and inspiring. If you got something out of it and you think you know someone else that would actually also enjoy it, we'd really appreciate if you could share the link with them and encourage them to check out our channel. And don't forget, you can join the Off-Grid Tribe podcast for free, where you can actually ask and interact with myself and also our guest speakers. So jump over today to offgridtribe.com, register yourself an account where you can actually have a conversation with myself and one of our guest speakers, and we can continue the conversation there. Together, let's embrace the power of sustainable living.